Is Trevor traveling somewhere else?
Is Trevor traveling this morning or working?
I guess he's working. He's tired of weddings. He went weddings last year, but he wasn't doing more than him. I guess he's working.
Yeah, he's not having to pay for him anymore, so that's better. That's gonna be better.
Jimmy G's from somewhere had coffee.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Yeah, that's right. Well, you make sure y'all go get on to your boys after this. Yeah. All right, so we're gonna start in 7:18 this morning. We covered a good bit of this last week, but it's really one total section from 7:18 to 8:8. So we're gonna spend a lot of time in 1 through 8 this morning, but I think it's worth going back and reviewing what we talked about last week and seeing what that has set up for us. So the theme of this passage, let's read it, is judgment. And so we'll start here. So 7:18 says, "In that day the Lord will whistle for the fly that is at the end of the streams of Egypt, and for the bee that is in the land of Assyria. And they will all come and settle in the steep ravines, and in the clefts of the rocks, and on all the thorn bushes, and on all the pastures. In that day the Lord will shave with a razor that is hired beyond the river, with the king of Assyria, the head and the hair of the feet, and it will sweep away the beard also. In that day a man will keep alive a young cow and 2 sheep, and because of the abundance of milk that they give, he will eat curds, for everyone who is left in the land will eat curds and honey. In that day every place where there used to be 1,000 vines, worth 1,000 shekels of silver, will become briars and thorns. With bows and arrows a man will come there, for all the land will be briars and thorns. And as for all the hills that used to be hoed with a hoe, you will not come there for fear of briars and thorns, but they will become a place where cattle are let loose and where sheep tread. Then the Lord said to me, take a large tablet and write on it in common characters belonging to Maher-shalal-Hashbaz. And I will get reliable witnesses, Uriah the priest and Zechariah the son of Berechiah, to attest for me. And I went to the prophetess, and she conceived and bore a son. And the Lord said to me, call his name Maher-shalal-Hashbaz, for the boy knows how to cry, my father or my mother. The wealth of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria will be carried away before the king of Assyria. The Lord spoke to me again, because this people has refused the waters of Shiloh that flow gently, and rejoice over Rezin and the son of Remaliah. Therefore, behold, the Lord is bringing up against them the waters of the river, mighty and many, the king of Assyria and all his glory. And it will rise over all its channels and go over all its banks, and it will sweep on into Judah, and it will overflow and pass on, reaching even to the neck. And its outspread wings will fill the breadth of your land, O Emmanuel." All right, so very happy, cheery passage for us to explore this morning, right? Okay, so remember, what is our context right now? Who is Isaiah? Who's Isaiah speaking to at this point? Where's our setting? So remember, we have Assyria is raised up as a major power. They are invading left and right. Their empire is growing. You see Rezin, the king of Syria, just Syria, not Assyria, also called Aram, just to the north of the northern kingdom of Israel. He and the king of Israel, Pekah, the son of Remaliah, is the king of Samaria, of Israel, the northern kingdom. Have partnered up with Egypt to try and protect themselves from Assyria, and they want to get Judah in on it. Judah says, "No, we're not going to partner with you guys on this because we don't feel like that's." We would like to think that it's because they were being faithful, not to partner with Egypt, but really they just don't feel like it's a political advantage for them. And so, what do? They Syria and Israel decide to go into a coalition against Judah, to force them into submission, either through conquering them and assimilating them into Israel again, or by forcing them to come and to surrender and to join the coalition. And so Isaiah goes to Ahaz, the king of Judah, who is standing outside the city at one of the water sources that flows into the city of Jerusalem. And that's where Isaiah encounters him. You guys remember why they're out there outside the city at the river?
Well, trying to determine how to have water in the city if the city was attacked. They had no water source in there.
Yeah, so Jerusalem doesn't have a water source flowing through it. All the water source for the city is outside the city walls. So in case of some sort of invasion or a siege, the water supply to the city could be cut off. And then, the city basically thirsts into submission pretty quickly. So they're going out there understanding that Israel and Aram, Syria, are looking to come and invade and take over. They're kind of shoring up their defenses. So he's out here with his engineers assessing what do we need to do to make sure that we can last through this. What was the significance? Does anybody know the significance of why the water source was outside of Jerusalem? Mm-hmm. So we look at most cities have are built around the river, right? And so you're growing up, you've got the water source running straight through. Water source is outside the city of Jerusalem. So big significant part of this, and it's a theme that recurs later on, is that Jerusalem is meant to be a city of faith, right? It's the city of the Lord. It's the city of the temple. It's a symbol that the water source is outside the city, that when you have an invasion coming in, your reliance, your trust is not on your infrastructure. It's on the fact that the Lord is going to provide. So the promise that God gives to his people is that if you obey, right, I will protect you. I will defeat your enemies. I will uphold you. No one's going to stand against you as long as you're faithful and you follow my commands. It didn't work too good. No, they've already got a pretty stained history at this point. It doesn't. And so that's ends up becoming one of the symbols of their trust in God, is the fact that the water source is outside the city. Any other city would say, we need to have this under control so that we can protect ourselves. And the idea is that Jerusalem is meant to be a city of faith, and the city that we trust that even though our water source is outside the city, that God's going to provide. We don't have to trust in our own engineers. We don't have to trust in our own abilities.
They later did build a viaduct, so their faith must have failed.
No, but it's already busted because they're out here trying to figure out how to build that viaduct, right?
Yeah.
So eventually they do build a tunnel, the tunnel of Hezekiah, that does bring water into the city for these cases. But shortly thereafter, Hezekiah is actually the king that introduces Babylon to the city, and we know how that worked out.
Isn't there kind of a parallel going along with that ridiculous thinking that they had?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really, because a lot of times people will say, well, the Lord's going to take care of us. When he gave us the resources and the brain to do the things we can do, the things we can't do, then we go to him for that. But they could have made a better choice.
Yeah. And that's the theme of this passage, is that is the alternatives to the ways of salvation are always the ways of destruction. And that those who hate wisdom love death. Proverbs 8:36 says that. So anything that the people of God trust in that's not God, he ultimately uses in judgment against them. So whatever they put their faith and their trust in, that tends to be the tool that God uses to judge them and punish them, because they find their salvation in other places. So the section that we're looking at here are oracles. So we've talked about that when we've read the minor prophets earlier. An oracle is a message from the Lord to the prophets to go and to share. And so Isaiah is bringing us through. These are what are called oracles of destruction. So this is a message that God is giving to Isaiah about the destruction that he's going to rain down, not just on Syria and on Israel, but eventually on Judah as well for their faithlessness, as we'll see. Ahaz is out here checking things out outside the city. Assyria is going to be the tool that God uses. So the things that we trust guarantee our destruction is the theme of this. So Ahaz is trusting in Assyria. So remember that in 7:18, the beginning in that day, the Lord will whistle for the fly that is at the end of the streams of Egypt and for the bee that's in the land of Assyria. So the Lord will whistle for that king to come and to take over. So Ahaz is putting his trust in Assyria because what is in the midst of all of this coalition and Israel and Samaria and Aram coming to invade, what does Ahaz do? He doesn't trust in the Lord to provide. What does he do? Who does he go to for help?
Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
No.
He goes to Assyria. Yeah. So the coalition is to protect Israel and Aram from Assyria. So he says, you know what? I'm going to go to Assyria and say, listen, these guys are trying to team up against me to fight you. If you'll take them out, we'll serve you. And we'll be a servant of Assyria. So they're trying to get in with the bad guys before the bad guys get here. So he said, maybe I'll have some favor when the bad guys come in, and they'll let us kind of continue to do our thing. And so he puts his trust not in the Lord to provide, but he puts his trust in Assyria. And so ultimately, this passage here, the Lord is saying that, you know, you're going to put your trust in Assyria, not me. Assyria is going to be the tool that I use to take you out, unfortunately. Yeah, and a long line of idiots, yeah. That continued on, yeah. So at the end of, if you remember the scene here, we're at the water source outside the city. God sends Isaiah out to meet the king and to tell the king good news, right? So he says, listen, Ahaz, if God has told me that if you trust in him to take care of you, he will deliver you free of charge. Just trust, just be faithful. And Ahaz's response is obviously not that. He decides to go and to build a coalition. He's out there trying to shore up his defenses. And so that's where we're at. This language that we're reading here, these oracles, the end of chapter 7 here, that's the setting is probably still there at the aqueduct, at the river area. And shortly thereafter, in chapter 8, we see is kind of the next stage. So timeline wise, we're still kind of where we've been, and we're going to be in the very next scene not too long after. There are 4 sections of this here, really 3 pairs that we're seeing. 4 sections of in that day. So you guys see that phrase in that day repeating there in 18 and in 20 and in 23. So each one of those pairs, and you've got another one shortly thereafter, where in that day typically refers to into what? What day are we talking about when we say in that day?
Day of the
prophets.
Lord.
The day of the Lord, right? And the day of the Lord is the day of judgment, right? So that is the day that the Lord will come and visit the judgment, his wrath on the iniquity of man and evil men. And so we have 4 sections. So we have 18, 20, 21, and 23. And then we see 2 sections of the Lord spoke or the Lord said. So that ends up becoming sort of 3 pairs of things that we're looking at. The first set is really 18 to 20. It's all about, all 3 of these pairs are about the conquest that's coming from Assyria and the scope of it. So the first pair is about the completeness of the conquest, just how thorough and complete and devastating this conquest of Assyria is going to be. And so that's from 18 to 20. So that's where we see that Assyria will come. We see that the land will be completely and totally occupied. So 18 and 19, they'll come, they'll settle in all the steep ravines, the clefts of the rocks, on the thorn bushes, all the pastures. Everything is in scope here. The land will be completely occupied. And then you see it shifts then to that language about the razor. Razors are used on men, right? Not on the land. So we see a shift then to people. And so the completeness of the conquest will be visited upon the people. They'll be stripped, they'll be shaved, they'll be humiliated. And so we see that not only will the land be completely filled with the Assyrian judgment, but also the people will be completely humiliated and torn down as a result. The second pair of the oracle here is the results of the conquest. So what is going to be the outcome of it? That's 21 to 25. And again, we look at the order of people and then land. So we have kind of that reverse, this almost like a poetic structure, this passage is. So if you remember studying poetry in high school, sometimes you've got the ABBA or AABB, the rhyming schemes and kind of the theme schemes. That's what we're seeing here. So, you've got land and people, and then we're going to go and do it in reverse order. We're going to do people and land. So 21 and 22, the people will be in poverty, complete devastation. The only thing that they'll have to eat is milk, like cheese from milks from the goats and the cows that they have. and honey, which is naturally occurring. That's they're finding honey and bringing that in. Their farms, their agriculture, everything else will be wiped out, be turned into briars and thorns. And then we see the land in decay. So after the conquest, the results would be that all the farms, everything that was pasture, everything that was grapevines, all of that worth, all of these thousands of shekels of silver becomes briars and thorns. And really the only thing it's good for is for hunting rabbits with a bow and arrow, or to let the cows and the sheep go out there and trample it all down and eat it. Okay, it's not good for anything else. The third pair of the oracle here is the course of the conquest and how it's gonna go basically. And then we see another pair here. So the first is, this is in chapter 8, 1-4. We see the imminent destruction of Aram and Israel. So the opponents of Judah. We see just how quickly that destruction is coming. And then finally, the last piece there from 5-8 is that the Assyrians will not only progress through Aram and Israel, but they're going to progress on down into Judah in the process because of Judah's unfaithfulness. So it's not going to stop there. It's going to come on down. All right. There's another structural device here. So we have these three pairs of judgment in that day, but we also have this comparison of the Assyrians' land and Emmanuel's land. Okay, you guys remember? So we talked about Emmanuel, I think week before last, in 7:16. You may want to remind us what Emmanuel means. It means God with us, right? And so if we recall just before this, so right before this passage, Isaiah has given a prophecy from the Lord about this child named Emmanuel, who will be born of a virgin or a maiden. And he'll be a sign to the house of the Lord that God will be with his people, right? Why was a sign of Emmanuel, God with us, needed in this context? You guys remember the message? So it was a reminder that God was going to be with them during what?
During the siege.
During the siege, yeah. So once things are going to be conquered, as judgment is coming and judgment is happening, it's a reminder that God will preserve his remnant. He will protect those who are faithful to him, and he will be with them throughout the judgment. So even though God is bringing punishment for the sins of the nation and of the leaders and of the people who are wicked and have strayed, there are always those within that group who are faithful, who are maintaining their allegiance to the Lord. And so the Lord does preserve and care for them. And so that sign of Emmanuel is that sign of the remnant. It's the people who will remain in God's favor. And so that's important as we come into this section today, because we're going to have another child born that ends up kind of replacing Emmanuel in this prophecy. So that's important for us to look at. But we have this idea of the land of Assyria, the land that is conquered by the Assyrian king, and the land of Emmanuel, which is the promised land, which is Jerusalem, which is the land of God's people. So we have the first here, we have Assyrian's land. There are two metaphors here that help us break this down. The first is the bee. So we see in verse 18 that the Lord will whistle for the fly that's in the streams of Egypt and for the bee that is in the land of Assyria. The bee was a symbol of Assyria, primarily because the hill country of Assyria was very known for lots of bees, lots of flowers, lots of agriculture. So it's kind of a symbol of their land, of their prowess. And so it's compared then to the fly that's at the end of the streams of Egypt. You guys remember we talked about the fly last week? When the Nile River in Egypt would swell up over the banks and it would settle back down, all of that sort of muck and silt and detritus, all that stuff would settle down on the banks as a result of that flooding. And then the flies would just come in and descend. And it just about couldn't breathe because there are so many flies. It's like having gnats in August in South Georgia. And so the flies and the stream, that's a symbol for the presence of Egypt. And then the bees are a symbol of the presence of Assyria. So these are two powers on either side of Jerusalem that are going to come in and affect what they're trying to do. And they're going to come in and they're going to invade. So they will all come there in verse 19, and they'll settle in the steep ravines, the cleft of the rocks, all these areas. So the bee is going to come in and completely occupy the land. And then we see the razor again. is going to completely occupy the people. It's going to shave them down completely. You guys remember the Hebrew word for feet that we see here? It's also it's a euphemism for like private parts. So for the hidden parts of the body, pubic hair is kind of what's in view here, what's being shaved. And so the picture then is that the people are going to be, not only their beards are going to be shaved, so the visible hair that marks them aside. You know, the beards in Jewish culture were very significant as a marker of who they were. Those are going to be shaved, as well as every other hair on their body that's hidden. Right, so there will be nothing that is safe, visible, or hidden that isn't being humiliated and pushed into judgment and subject to judgment. So that is going to be, again, just complete under Assyria's. When this land becomes Assyria's and they come in to take over, it's going to be total. There's not going to be anything that's left hidden. All right. Judah then will be crushed. The people will be impoverished. The land will decay. The next pair there is that Israel will be eliminated. So we have Assyrians' land, Judah crushed, and then we have Israel to be eliminated. The people will be deported. Land will be swamped and drowned in this floodwater image that's coming through. And then finally, we see in scope Emmanuel's land. And we see another two metaphors here. One being the flood, which is going to engulf the land. We see that starting with the flood about the streams of Egypt as they overflow, but also this river that's mentioned there in verse 6 and 7 of chapter 8. So this river is going to come in, and it's used as a flood metaphor to drown out the people in judgment. And then finally, the other metaphor is this image of like a bird of prey. So the eagle was a symbol of Assyria. It was, on their crest, on their shields. So it was a symbol of that kingdom. And so the last piece we have here in verse 8 is that we have this outspread wings covering the land like a shadow. So it's this picture of like a bird of prey circling, waiting for its prey to be ready to pounce on. So it's the people, kind of constantly under the threat here in Judah. Okay. That's our structure. So let's go verse by verse. So when we start in verse 18 here, in that day, the Lord will whistle for the fly in the streams of Egypt and for the bead that is in the land of Assyria. If you remember when we were looking in chapters 1 through 5, sort of our preamble to the book, we saw this message of judgment, right? That the Lord was going to call a nation, a force, an army to come in and to execute judgment. This is where we finally have the name of who that's going to be. So it's presented, it's going to be Egypt, and it's going to be Assyria. Egypt is significant. What does Egypt continue to kind of recur as a theme in the Old Testament? We see Egypt pop up. It typically has a purpose each time we see it. What is Egypt to the Hebrews? Most significantly, an enemy. Yeah, slavery. Right. So the Egyptians captured the Jews, the Hebrews, and put them into slavery for 400 years. And then we have this book called the Exodus, right? That's all about the leaving behind of Egypt. And the rest of the Torah, the other 5 books of Moses, are all about them getting out of Egypt and getting into the promised land, right? And what do the people do the entire time that they're wandering in the wilderness?
Besides complain?
Yeah, besides complain, right? So many of them say, yeah, let's go back to Egypt. Things were better in Egypt. We had watermelon and salt and delicious stuff, right? We had squash and all these other things. And turnips, yeah, all sorts of stuff. Garlic, yeah, let's go back. Just let's completely forget about the slavery things. They've got watermelon. Let's go do it. So yeah, that's Egypt. Then continues to be a theme throughout the Old Testament and into the New Testament. Matthew picks this up significantly of reliance on an outside force, of returning to oppression. Egypt continues to be a symbol of oppression and slavery and man's power trying to assert itself over God's kingdom, God's people.
A dog returning to his vomit.
Yeah, so the people want to keep going back to it, right? And so that's a recurring theme. So even though the people, they were the same generation that was in slavery is wanting to return back when they're wandering in the wilderness. And then you have kings like Solomon who are going and marrying children of daughters of the Pharaoh. and building those alliances. You see that now the people are wanting to go to Egypt for help against Assyria. They'll go back to Egypt for help against Babylon later on. And so we see this constant theme of, okay, well, they're big and they're political and they're right next to us. And so we should make an ally with them to protect us from everybody else. And so they're a constant theme of the people going and trusting in whoever the biggest political military partner is next to them instead of the God that brought them out of Egypt to provide for them. And
I found this on the web.
oh, thanks, Siri. Apparently that was a Eisenhower quote. We're good. Yep. It's a quote from Dwight Eisenhower. So I don't know what that was. So yeah, that's Egypt as a theme. Yeah. And so Egypt, it comes back to be, it's the political faith versus faith in God to provide. That's usually the contrast we have. Do we trust in Egypt as a military power to help us, or do we trust in the Lord to provide for us? And so Egypt is obviously in view here with the Nile and the flies. So we go to 19. We see they will all come and settle in the steep ravines and the clefts of the rocks, on the thorn bushes and on all the pastures. So in English, for us, this is a picture of kind of the whole topography of Jerusalem, of Israel, of this whole sort of Jordan Valley, Eastern Mediterranean areas. You've got these steep cliffs, you've got all these rocky areas, you've got thorn bushes and briars, all the flat pastures where they keep the animals. It's sort of all the different elements of the land there. The interesting thing is that in Hebrew, there's an alliteration here. So if you remember, alliteration is where, like in poetry, other things, you're using the same sound over and over. So like, a D sound over. So the dumb dog decided to dig. That's alliteration. To dig a hole. Yeah. You got it. Huh? Dig the hole. Yeah, that's right. So that's alliteration. That's what's happening here in the Hebrew. And so anytime you have repetition in Hebrew, that is a sign of completeness, right? And so when they didn't have a word for like very or a lot of or much, what they would just say is they would just repeat the word. So if 3 times, yeah. So if you ever see a word repeated 3 times, significant, because it means that they're saying much, 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 like very, very, like to the full extent 3 times. The only way that it could be more is if it's 7, right? Because 7 is the number of completion. That's like full, complete, everything else. And so you see this repetition of this Hebrews, the new is the sound that's repeated. And so what Isaiah is pointing out is basically by calling out these different levels of topography, they all start with the same sound. And so he's saying it's complete. It's going to be everything that could possibly be covered in this land is going to be covered and subject to all of this. I'm not going to get through all this. Good grief. I have the Jason syndrome. I've got 7 minutes.
Pretty standard for this class.
Pretty standard. Yep. That's how it works. Yep. So we've talked about the razor. One thing to point out in verse 20 there. So we talked about the razor that's hired beyond the river. When we say hired, it's important because we've got 2 sort of pictures here. One is that God brings judgment from a wicked kingdom. So they're almost like they're working for hire. They're not doing this, they're doing it out of their own selfish glory, but they're doing it as a method of God calling them. God has whistled for them to come and to serve his judgment, just as God calls the Babylonians to come and invade Judah. The barbershop was busy. He is busy. Yeah, he had some business, right? And so this language of being hired beyond the river is also, so there's this picture of God's agency in bringing them in and using them as a tool of judgment. But also hired is literally, so Ahaz has hired Assyria to come and to protect them, right? He takes money out of the temple, he takes money out of the treasury, and he pays Assyria to come and to protect them. And so this razor that he has hired is going to come and it's going to shave him. And it did, yeah. And later comes and turns on Judah. That's right. And so there's irony there, is that this guy that you've hired for protection is going to be the one that I've hired to come in and take you out. Okay. So we talked about the public and the private. It's going to be complete humiliation. Let's move on then to 23 through 25. Because we've talked about these other pieces. 25, we have this picture of the hills to be hoed with a hoe. Hoed with a hoe is kind of a weird expression for us. But in the Hebrew, what that's really, it's making it very specific. It's talking about like intention when you're repeating those 2 things. And the picture here is that they're putting intense effort and intention and intentionality into farming this area, and it's not going to produce anything. It's going to produce briars and thorns. All of their labors, all of their efforts to defend themselves, to try and make the land work for them, are going to fail, and it's going to become briars and thorns. The only thing it's going to be good for is for sheep and cows to go trample it down, and for you to go try and hunt with maybe a bow and arrow out there for animals that are crawling around, small animals that are crawling around under the thicket. That's all you got. Huh? Sounds like Larry's garden. Yeah. Briars and thorns.
Briars and thorns, yes.
Yeah.
Gonna get
So
taken
yeah,
care
and
of.
so what it really shows is that there's all of their efforts to maintain the land, to defend the land, are going to be for nothing. They're going to be useless, and they're going to experience total loss. Now that's really what we see through this passage here. Is they're going to have a total loss of dignity. Verse 20. They're going to have a total loss of the abundance of the land. They're going to have a total loss of their savings and everything that they've stored up. It's going to be taken away. They're going to have a total loss of their labors and the fruits of their labors, because everything that they've put effort into is not going to produce. It's going to be taken away and stripped, literally out of the land and taken away. And so what is the result of this? We see in 8:1, the Lord tells Isaiah, he says, take a big tablet, which is really like just a big sign, something really big, public, visible, and write on it in ordinary or common language. This is used also in Exodus 32 to describe Moses with the chisel for the words. Really, it just means something that's big, legible, understandable to the common person. So the idea here is like, write this big sign, put it in a public place, write it in a way that everybody, no matter how much education they've got, can read it and see and understand what it's going to say. And what does it say? It says, Maher Shalal Hashbaz. Okay. Anybody know what that means? Everybody knows that one, right? All right. So it is it means speed. The literal words, it's speed, spoil, haste, plunder, right? To really kind of take it in a phrase would be hurry to the spoils, hurry to the plunder, right? So the speed spoils, the haste plunders. It's this picture of an army that is coming in, and they're so confident they're going to win that their focus is on the prize at the end of it, not on the battle. They're not even thinking that the battle is going to be an issue. They're hurrying to the prize and the plunder. So they have no concern about not making it, because they're like, let's just hurry up and get to the prize, because this army's not going to be anything. Assyria is coming in, and there's such confidence in their victory that they're going to go straight for it. And so how do we know that? Well, because Syria and Israel are going to fall super quickly. They don't last long. This whole thing's over in about 18 months. So the next part here, Uriah and Zechariah. So why do we have these guys here? Uriah the priest and Zechariah the son of Berechiah. These guys are basically serving as witnesses to show that, okay, listen, God has pronounced judgment. And that these witnesses are here to attest to it. He's already said that he's going to bring judgment. The enemy is speeding. We've seen that, and this is a theme. So in chapter 5, 26 to 28, the word of the speediness of the judgment is proclaimed. It's preached by Isaiah. And then in 8:1 here, it's written down for everybody to see. So it becomes a little more concrete. And then in 8:3, whenever Isaiah's son is born, and God says, actually, I want you to call him Maher Shalal Hashbaz. So the first thing is write this phrase on a sign, and now I want you to name your child this. The word now has become flesh. Okay, that's an image that is picked up by the gospel writers later on, right? So God's judgment, his word that he's talking about, the speedy judgment of these two nations, has now become flesh. And what does he say? He says, before the boy knows how to cry, my father or my mother, before he can speak and say, dada or mama, these two kingdoms are going to fall to Assyria. So that gives them about 9 months, 9 to 12 months. And so now we see a timeline assigned to when this judgment is coming. So yeah, it's going to be quick, but it's going to be soon as well. All right. Prophetess here, I think it's important to say, the prophetess is not a title that is being given to Isaiah's wife. Really, it's more to the fact that she is bearing the word of God, right? The word of God is coming to the people through her son. And so literally she is bearing the word of God forth. Maher Shalal Hashbaz, that word that's been written on the sign, is now coming forth. And so that's why he's calling her prophetess there. It's not that they had sort of co-pastorship or co-prophetship. Okay. All right. And so here we have a timeline then. So we know it's going to be about 9 months. The child will be about 9 months old when the kingdom falls. And then we see a link to Emmanuel, which I'm going to let Jason expand on it next week because I know that he would love to do that. A couple things to look at here as we close out is that really the timing update pushes Emmanuel's birth from 716 and his reign back farther. So remember, the land is going to be Emmanuel's land. Emmanuel will come. He'll be born of a virgin, of a maiden, and this land is going to be his. Emmanuel is the fourfold name of blessing. It's got 4 parts. It's all about blessing. Mahershalal Hashbaz, 4 words of judgment. And so the word of blessing is pushed back as the word of judgment now comes into play. Mahershalal Hashbaz has been born while we're still waiting on Emmanuel to be born in this piece. And so this update pushes them back. And then in chapter 9, that's when we have the prophecy of Emmanuel that Matthew later picks up. So how do we know that this is the case? Well, in 734, King Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria marches down the Mediterranean coast through the Philistia, through the Syrian coast, and then marches all the way down to Egypt. He cuts off Egypt's connection to the Israeli peninsula area there. And so any help that they could get from Egypt, it's gone. It's cut off. Syria's not going to let them cross. And so now Israel and Aram don't have their big military ally. It's just the 2 of them. So 733, the next year, Israel loses Galilee in the Transjordan Valley. We see that in 2 Kings 15. And then finally in 732, Damascus, the capital of Aram, falls. And so within that sort of 18-month period, the Assyrians come in, they take out Egypt, they take out Israel, and they take out Syria, and it's done. It's happened. The important thing to see here is that this language of the waters of the river, it's that flood of how quickly this is coming in and how devastating this is in judgment doesn't stop. That flood doesn't stop when it gets to the border of Judah. When a flood's rising, if it keeps raining today, the next couple of days like it has been, and you go down there to the Withlacoochee River, what's it going to be doing? It's going to be flooding. Do you just walk out and say, all right, flood waters, you got to stop right here on the boundary of Lowndes County. Y'all stay in Cook County, right? No, it doesn't. That water goes where it's going to go, right? And so this flood, as it comes in judgment over Israel and Aram, it's not stopping. And it's got the momentum. It comes into Judah. But we see that the water will rise over all of its channels and go over all of its banks. And then in verse 8, it will sweep into Judah. It'll overflow and it passes on. And this is the important language that reaches even to the neck, right? So if it reaches up to the neck, can you survive that? Yeah. You can still breathe, right? You can still breathe. You can swim. It's not over your head anymore. So it's this remnant language. God is not going to completely wipe out Judah, but Judah is going to suffer for what they've done. Assyria doesn't take out Jerusalem. Babylon comes and does that later. It does completely take out Israel. It does completely take out Aram. And so even now, God has provided. There is judgment, but they're going to survive. And then there at the end of verse 8, the outspread wings of Assyria will fill the breadth of the land. The entire land of Judah will be under the shadow of these wings, just like as an eagle or a vulture is circling, waiting to come down and smack its prey. And you can see it. You know that it's getting ready to come down and eat its prey. They're going to be living under the shadow of, okay, now we've submitted to Assyria for defense. It's just a matter of time before they're going to come down and pounce on us. And that's the picture that we end with there. Jason's going to cover the rest of that for us next week about the river of Shiloh. That's really important, and about Mahershalal Hashbaz and Emmanuel. But let's stop there because we are at time. Thank you guys for listening this morning. Father, we thank you for Isaiah, for the words that we have seen. Father, help us to remember that any time that we put our trust in our salvation in anything but you, Father, that is just inviting judgment on us. It is inviting those things to become the tools of judgment against us. That anything that we can hold on to will ultimately crumble and fall apart in your glory. Help us to seek your glory first, Father, in everything that we do, even as we go out this morning. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks, guys.
See when you're talking about the razor hire and